laughter, shouts, the kind of carefree noise only a group of young men can make. But before any of that filled my house, my own son looked me in the eyes and asked me to disappear. "Dad, it's better if you're not here when they arrive." The sting of those words cut deeper than I ever imagined. In that moment, I wasn't a father anymore. I was a burden to be hidden away. Something broke inside me, but something else was born too. A resolve, cold and sharp, to teach him the kind of lesson that would echo for the rest of his life. This is my story. My name is Edward, and tonight you'll discover how a father, once humiliated by his own son, turned that humiliation into a victory no one in that room would ever forget. I share this story hoping it reaches your heart, reminding you that dignity is not negotiable and justice finds its way even when love is betrayed. But before I go on, I ask you to subscribe to this channel and comment below where you're listening from. Because before I reveal exactly how I turned his cold rejection into the coldest lesson of his life, you need to understand who I am and why my son thought he could erase me from his world. My name is Edward Mitchell, and at 64 years old, I've built more than most men dream of in a lifetime. When I started Mitchell Properties 38 years ago, I had nothing but a pickup truck, a toolbox, and a stubborn refusal to accept failure. Today, that company owns over 200 commercial properties across 3 states, employs 400 people, and generates revenue that would make your head spin. But success came at a price. My marriage to Sandra didn't survive the long hours, the constant travel, the phone calls that interrupted family dinners. 4 years ago, she walked away with half of everything I'd built, claiming I loved my business more than my family. Maybe she was right. Maybe I did choose contracts over conversations, board meetings over birthday parties. The divorce was brutal, not just financially, but emotionally. Sandra fought for everything. The house in Westchester, the vacation home in the Hamptons, even tried to get a piece of the business. But the one thing I fought hardest for was custody of Marcus. My son was 23 then, technically an adult, but still my boy, still the kid who used to ride on my shoulders through construction sites, who'd wear my hard hat that was too big for his head. I thought winning that battle meant something. I thought it meant Marcus chose me. The house where this humiliation took place isn't just any house. It's a 6,000 square foot colonial in Bedford, New York, with marble floors that echo your footsteps, a kitchen that cost more than most people's cars, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook perfectly manicured grounds. Every brick, every piece of crown molding, every custom detail was chosen by me. I built this house to be a legacy, a place where the Mitchell name would mean something for generations. After the divorce, I moved here with Marcus. I thought it would be our chance to bond, father and son, building the kind of relationship I'd neglected during his childhood. I gave him everything, a trust fund that ensured he'd never want for anything, a job at the company whenever he wanted it, complete freedom to find himself. But somehow in trying to give him everything, I taught him to value nothing. Marcus is 27 now, with his mother's striking blue eyes and my stubborn jawline. He graduated from Columbia with a business degree I paid for, but he's never held a job for more than 6 months. He has expensive tastes, designer clothes, luxury cars, exclusive restaurants, all funded by the allowance I foolishly continued paying long after he should have been supporting himself. I told myself I was being generous. I told myself I was making up for the years I'd missed while building the business. But deep down, I think I was buying his love, trying to purchase the relationship that work had cost me. The friends he surrounds himself with are carbon copies of him. Privileged kids who never learned the value of a dollar, who judge people by their watches and their zip codes. They treat my house like their personal playground, leaving messes for the housekeeper to clean, eating food they never paid for, using amenities they never earned. and I allowed it. God help me, I allowed it, because seeing Marcus happy, even surrounded by shallow friends, felt better than seeing him alone. But that Friday evening in October, something shifted. The autumn air was crisp with the promise of winter, and I'd just returned from a particularly grueling day of negotiations for a new property acquisition in Manhattan. I was tired, looking forward to a quiet evening, maybe watching the Yankees game in my study with a glass of the 25-year-old scotch. I saved for special occasions. I found Marcus in the kitchen, frantically organizing bottles of expensive liquor I'd never bought. The granite countertops were covered with imported beer, top-shelf whiskey and champagne that cost more per bottle than most people make in a day. "Going somewhere?" I asked, setting down my briefcase. He turned, and for just a moment, I saw something. In his eyes, not guilt exactly, but calculation, like he was weighing his words carefully. "Actually, Dad, I'm having a few friends over tonight. Nothing big, just a small gathering." Nothing about this looked small. The amount of alcohol alone suggested a party that would go well into the morning, but I'd learned to pick my battles. "With Marcus, how many friends?" I asked, loosening my tie. "Maybe 8 or 10. You know, just the usual crowd." I knew the usual crowd. Trust fund babies who'd never worked a day in their lives, who spoke about money like it grew on trees, who treated service workers like they were invisible, but they were Marcus's friends, and I'd made peace with that long ago. "All right," I said. "I'll stay out of your way. Might head to the study and catch up on some reading." That's when he said it, the words that would change everything between us. "Actually, Dad, it's better if you're not here when they arrive." The kitchen fell silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I stared at my son, certain I'd misheard. Excuse me? Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. He busied himself arranging bottles, speaking to the counter instead of to me. "It's just, you know how you are around my friends. You ask all those questions about their families and their work. It makes everyone uncomfortable." My chest tightened. "How I am. You know what I mean. All that talk about building character and earning your way in life. They're just here to have fun, not get a lecture about the value of hard work." Each word was a small knife, but I kept my voice steady. "This is my house, Marcus. I know that." He finally looked at me, and what I saw there was worse than anger or frustration. It was embarrassment. My own son was embarrassed by me. "But couldn't you just go somewhere for a few hours? Maybe visit Uncle Robert, or go to that wine bar. Downtown you like." I stood there in my own kitchen, in the house I'd built with my own sweat and determination, listening to my son suggest I should make myself scarce so his friends wouldn't have to be subjected to my presence. "You want me to leave my own home?" "It's not permanent, Dad, just for tonight. They'll be gone by midnight, and then everything goes back to normal." Normal. As if there was anything normal about a father being asked to exile himself so his adult son could play pretend in the man's own house. I looked around the kitchen, at the custom cabinets I'd personally selected, at the marble I'd imported from Italy, at the wine rack filled with bottles I'd been collecting for 20 years. This wasn't just a house to me. It was proof of everything I'd accomplished. Everything I'd built from nothing, and my son wanted me to abandon it so he could entertain friends who apparently found my presence offensive. "Fine," I said quietly. Marcus's relief was immediate and unmistakable. "Really, thanks, Dad. I promise they'll be respectful, no mess, no damage." I nodded and walked toward the door, but I stopped at the threshold. Something cold and analytical was settling in my chest, the same feeling I got when a business negotiation turned adversarial. "Marcus," I said without turning around, "those friends of yours, what exactly have you told them about me?" A pause. Too long of a pause. "What do you mean? I mean, what do they think I do for a living? Where do they think this house came from? What's your explanation for the lifestyle you're able to afford?" Another pause. "They know you work in real estate." "Work in real estate, as if I was some weekend agent showing condos to retirees." I see. And the house? They know it's ours. Ours, not mine. Not something I'd built through 4 decades of 18-hour days and calculated risks. Ours, like it, was some family inheritance we'd stumbled into together. I turned back to face him. Anything else they should know? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Dad, why are you asking all these questions? I told you they'll be respectful. But he hadn't answered my question, had he? And in that non-answer, I began to understand the true scope of what was happening here. I wasn't just being asked to leave my house. I was being asked to disappear from my son's life entirely, at least the version of his life he presented to others. I was the embarrassing father who asked too many questions, who talked too much about work ethic and responsibility. I was the inconvenient reminder that his lifestyle was built on someone else's success. I'll be in my study for a few minutes, I said. Then I'll get out of your way. I walked upstairs to my office, closed the door, and sat in the leather chair, behind the mahogany desk where I'd made decisions worth millions of dollars. But this wasn't about business. This was about dignity, respect, and the realization that my son didn't just take my money for granted. He took me for granted. Outside, I could hear cars pulling into the circular driveway. Expensive engines, the kind that purr rather than roar. Marcus's friends were arriving, ready to enjoy my hospitality while pretending I didn't exist. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to my assistant. There were some calls I needed to make, some arrangements that required immediate attention, because if Marcus wanted me to disappear, I'd give him exactly what he asked for. But disappearing and giving up are 2 very different things. I didn't leave that night. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I became a spy in my own home. The study where I'd retreated has a peculiar architectural feature that the original builder probably never intended for surveillance. The air return vent connects directly to the main living areas downstairs, and when the house is quiet, sound travels through those ducts with startling clarity. It's how I used to hear Marcus sneaking snacks as a kid, how I knew when he was staying up too late on school nights. Tonight, it would serve a different purpose. I dimmed the lights and positioned myself near the vent, feeling like a stranger. In my own house, the shame of it burned in my chest, but the need to understand what my son really thought of me burned hotter. The voices drifted up clearly as his friends settled into the living room I'd furnished with antiques and artwork worth more than most people's houses. Dude, this place never gets old, came a voice I recognized as Jake Morrison, son of a hedge fund manager who'd probably never worked a day in his life. Your uncle really knows how to live. My uncle? I sat up straighter, pressing closer to the vent. Yeah, well, Uncle Edward has good taste, Marcus replied with casual ease. He travels a lot for business, so we pretty much have the place to ourselves most of the time. Uncle Edward. In my son's version of reality, I wasn't his father. I was some convenient relative who owned this house and conveniently stayed absent. What kind of business is he in again? Asked another voice. Chelsea Williams, if I remembered correctly, daughter of a pharmaceutical executive. Import-export, mostly works with overseas clients, which is why he's gone so much. Pretty boring stuff, actually. Import-export. My 38 years of building Mitchell properties, of transforming empty lots into thriving commercial centers, of employing hundreds of people and contributing millions to the local economy, reduced to import-export. The conversation continued, and with each passing minute the knife twisted deeper. Where's your dad tonight? Jake asked. Didn't you say he lives here too? Marcus's laugh was casual, dismissive. Oh, he's around somewhere. Probably reading in his room or something. He's not really the social type. Kind of keeps to himself. As if I was some reclusive boarder who occasionally emerged from the shadows. What does he do? Chelsea pressed. He's a janitor. Well, was a janitor. He's retired now. The words hit me like a physical blow. A janitor. My son had told his friends that I was a retired janitor. Really? Jake sounded surprised. How does he afford to live in a place like this? Uncle Edward lets him stay here out of family loyalty, you know. Dad worked his whole life, saved every penny. When he retired, Uncle Edward offered him a place to live. It's actually pretty generous considering. Family loyalty. Generous. My son had created an entire narrative where I was the charity case, the pitied relative living off the kindness of fictional Uncle Edward. I gripped the edge of my desk until my knuckles went white. 40 years of sacrifice, of building something meaningful, of providing my son with every advantage money could buy. And this was how he repaid me, not just with ingratitude, but with complete erasure of my identity. That's actually really sweet, Chelsea said. Not everyone would take care of family like that. Yeah, Uncle Edward's a good guy, though I have to manage the house stuff since he's traveling so much. You know, make sure everything runs smoothly, handle the staff, all. That responsibility. Handle the staff, manage the house. Marcus was taking credit for everything I'd built, while simultaneously diminishing me to a pitied dependent. The cruelest part was how smoothly he told these lies, how comfortable he seemed with this alternate reality where he was the successful nephew managing his generous uncle's estate while graciously providing shelter for his unfortunate janitor father. Must be nice having all this space, said a voice I didn't recognize. It has its perks, Marcus replied, though sometimes I feel bad about Dad. He doesn't really fit in with our crowd, you know. Different background, different interests. I try to include him sometimes, but it's awkward for everyone. Awkward for everyone. I, the man who paid for every luxury my son enjoyed, was an awkward inconvenience to be managed and hidden. Well, you're a good son for taking care of him, Chelsea said warmly. I try. It's not always easy, but family is family. Family is family. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I listened to them settle in, heard the pop of champagne corks and the clink of glasses filled with liquor I'd paid for. They talked about their plans for the weekend, a ski trip to Aspen, shopping in Manhattan, dinner at restaurants where entrees cost more than minimum wage workers made in a week. Throughout it all, Marcus played the gracious host, the successful young man managing his uncle's estate while charitably caring for his blue-collar father. He was so convincing that I almost wondered if he'd started believing his own lies. But the most painful moment came around 11 o'clock, when someone mentioned seeing an older man in the kitchen earlier. Oh, that was just my dad, Marcus said, with casual dismissal. He was grabbing a snack. I asked him to stay upstairs tonight so we could have some privacy. Does he always do what you tell him? Jake asked with amusement. Marcus laughed, actually laughed at the question. Pretty much. He knows his place. I mean, he's grateful for what he has here. He's not going to rock the boat. He knows his place. Grateful for what he has. Those words echoed in my mind like a death sentence. My son didn't just disrespect me. He'd convinced himself that I should be grateful for the privilege of being tolerated in my own home. I sat in the darkness of my study, listening to my son entertain his friends with stories that painted me as a pathetic dependent, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The love was still there. It would always be there. But the blind indulgence, the endless patience, the willingness to excuse his behavior because I felt guilty about the divorce, all of that crystallized into something harder. Marcus wanted to play games with my identity. He wanted to erase my accomplishments and rewrite history to make himself look better. He wanted to treat me like a charity case in my own home. Fine. Let's play. I opened my laptop and began researching private investigators in the area. If my son was living a double life, telling elaborate lies to his friends about our family situation, I needed to know exactly how deep this deception ran, because something told me that the lies about me being a janitor were just the beginning. I also made a mental note to check Marcus's credit card statements in the morning. If he was managing Uncle Edward's estate and handling house responsibilities, I was suddenly very curious about exactly what expenses he was managing and who was paying for them. The laughter continued downstairs, but I was no longer listening. He was planning, and for the first time in years, I felt like the businessman who'd built an empire from nothing instead of the guilty father who'd been buying his son's affection with unlimited generosity. Marcus had asked me to disappear. Tomorrow, I'd start making that wish come true in ways he never intended. But first, I had some investigating to do. What do you think so far? Is this the kind of story that makes you want to hear what happens next? The next morning, I woke with the kind of clarity that comes after a long fever breaks. The hurt was still there, but it had crystallized into something useful. Purpose. Marcus was still asleep when I made my coffee, no doubt recovering from his performance the night before. I'd heard his friends leave around 2 in the morning, their expensive cars purring down the driveway like satisfied cats. I sat in my kitchen in my house, bought with my money, and did something I'd never done before. I opened Marcus's credit card statements. As his father and the account holder, I had every legal right to review his spending, but I'd always respected his privacy, trusted him to be responsible. Trust, I was learning, had been a luxury I couldn't afford. The numbers that stared back at me from my laptop screen were staggering. $13,000 in the past month alone. $13,000 that I'd been automatically paying without question because I'd set up his cards for emergencies and small expenses. Delacroix, $847. That was the French restaurant in Manhattan where movie stars went to be seen. Tiffany & Co., $2,300. What exactly had he bought there? The Oak Room, $1,200. The exclusive club where membership alone cost more than most people's cars. But those weren't the transactions that made my blood run cold. Those were the charges that revealed the true scope of my son's deception. Round trip. Flights to Miami for 4 people. $3,800. Hotel accommodation at the Fontainebleau for 3 nights. $2,100. Dinner at Joe's Stone Crab for 8 people. $1,400. 8 people. Marcus had taken 7 friends on a vacation to Miami, paying for everything, playing the generous host who could afford such extravagance. I scrolled back further, my coffee growing cold as the pattern emerged. Month after month of lavish spending, always for groups, always at the most expensive places in New York. Marcus wasn't just living beyond his means. He was buying his friends' admiration with my money. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The lies about me being a janitor weren't just about embarrassment. They were about maintaining his cover story. How could he explain funding a lifestyle worth 6 figures a year if his father was just a retired custodian? So he'd created Uncle Edward, the mysterious import-export businessman who owned this house and funded Marcus's generosity. In my son's version of reality, I was the barely tolerated dependent, while he was the successful young man with access to family wealth. My phone rang, interrupting my financial archaeology. The caller ID showed James Mitchell, my brother, a successful lawyer in Boston, who actually was in import-export law, coincidentally enough. Morning, Edward. How's retirement treating you? Retirement. Even my own brother thought I'd stepped. Back from the business. I'm not retired, James. Where did you get that idea? A pause. Marcus mentioned it when he called last month. Said you'd decided to take a step back, let him handle more of the day-to-day operations at Mitchell Properties. Let him handle operations. Marcus had never worked a day at my company. He'd turned down every job offer I'd made, claiming he needed to find his own path. James, Marcus doesn't work for me. He's never worked for me. Another pause. Longer this time. Edward, I'm confused. He called asking for advice about commercial real estate law, said he was taking over more responsibilities as you transitioned to a consulting role. The web of lies was bigger than I'd imagined. Marcus wasn't just deceiving his friends, he was deceiving my family, creating an elaborate fantasy where he was stepping into my shoes while I gracefully faded into the background. What kind of advice did he ask for? Partnership. Structures, mostly. How to restructure ownership if you wanted to bring in a younger partner. I assumed you two were discussing him joining the business officially. Partnership structures. My son was researching how to take over my company while telling everyone I was semi-retired. The audacity was breathtaking. After I hung up with James, I sat in my kitchen staring at the evidence spread across my laptop screen. Credit card statements showing impossible spending. A phone call revealing lies about my professional status. And somewhere upstairs, the architect of this deception was sleeping peacefully in a bed I'd bought, in a house I'd built, dreaming of a future where I was erased entirely. I made 3 phone calls. The first was to David Chen, a private investigator I'd used for business due diligence. David, I need a full background check on someone. Social media, financial activity, associations, the works. Business or personal? Personal, very personal. The second call was to my accountant, Margaret Walsh. Margaret, I need a complete audit of all accounts Marcus has access to. Every credit, card, every automatic payment, every transaction for the past year. Is there a problem, Edward? There's about to be. The third call was the hardest. I dialed my ex-wife, Sandra. Edward, this is unexpected. Her voice carried the cool politeness we'd maintained since the divorce. Sandra, I need to ask you something about Marcus. What has he told you about my involvement in the business lately? Why would you ask that? Please, just humor me. A sigh. He said you were thinking about selling, that you were tired of the stress and wanted to enjoy your golden years. He seemed excited about maybe taking over some aspects of the operation. Taking over. Not joining, not helping. Taking over. When did he tell you this? A few months ago. Edward, what's this about? I closed my eyes. Sandra, I haven't taken a single day off in 2 years. I'm running the company exactly like I always have. Marcus has never expressed any interest in the business until apparently now. Silence on the other end of the line. Are you telling me he lied? I'm telling you our son has been living a fantasy life where I'm conveniently stepping aside so he can claim credit for everything I've built. When I hung up, I felt like I was seeing my son clearly for the first time in years. This wasn't just entitled behavior or financial irresponsibility. This was systematic identity theft, a calculated campaign to erase my accomplishments and claim them as his own. Marcus finally wandered into the kitchen around noon, looking exactly like someone who'd spent the night drinking expensive liquor and playing the generous host. Morning, Dad. Thanks for staying out of the way last night. Really appreciate it. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been reviewing his latest credit card charges. How was your evening? Good. Just a quiet night with friends. Quiet night. $3,000 in liquor and catering, according to his statements. Marcus, can I ask you something? He was already reaching for the coffee, not really listening. Sure. What do you tell your friends I do for a living? His hand froze halfway to the coffee pot. What do you mean? It's a simple question. When they ask about your father, what do you tell them? I tell them you work in real estate. Anything else? Like what? I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much I might know. Like whether I own the company, whether I built it, myself. Whether this house belongs to me or to some fictional uncle. The coffee pot slipped from his hand. It shattered on the marble floor, spreading coffee and ceramic across the kitchen like dark blood. Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. Uncle, Edward. I stood up slowly. Import-export. Your father, the retired janitor who lives here out of family charity? Marcus's face went through several shades of pale. How did I find out that my own son has been systematically erasing my identity to impress his friends? I gestured to my laptop. Maybe it was the $13,000 you spent last month on my credit cards. Maybe it was the conversation I overheard last night. Or maybe it was the phone call from your Uncle James, who's very confused about my supposed retirement. Dad, I can explain. Explain what? Explain how you've been funding a fantasy lifestyle with my money while telling everyone I'm a charity case. Explain how you've been researching partnership structures for a company you've never worked for. Or explain how you asked me to disappear from my own house so your friends wouldn't have to be subjected to the embarrassing presence of their host's father. Marcus stood in the middle of the broken coffee pot, looking like the child I'd once thought he was. But children grow up. And sometimes they grow into people you don't recognize. I never meant for it to go this far, he said quietly. How far did you mean for it to go, Marcus? When you decided I was an embarrassment to be hidden. When you created a fictional uncle to explain your lifestyle. When you started telling people I was a janitor. He couldn't meet my eyes. You don't understand the pressure I'm under with these people. They have expectations, so you chose to meet their expectations by destroying your father's reputation and stealing his accomplishments. I wasn't stealing anything. I just simplified the story. Simplified. That was what he called complete fabrication. I walked around the broken coffee pot and stood directly in front of my son. Marcus, effective immediately. All your credit cards are cancelled. Your access to any accounts connected to Mitchell Properties is terminated. Your trust fund is frozen, pending a complete audit. His face went white. Dad, you can't do that. I have obligations, commitments. To whom? Your friends who think you're the generous nephew of Uncle Edward? The people you've been impressing with my money while calling. Me a janitor behind my back? Please, Dad, let me fix this. I'll tell them the truth. I studied his face, looking for genuine remorse, real understanding of what he'd done. What I saw instead was panic. Not regret for hurting me, but fear of losing his funding. The truth? I asked softly. Would that be the truth where you apologize for lying about me, or the truth where you explain that every dollar you've spent on them came from the pocket of the embarrassing old man you've been hiding upstairs? Marcus reached for me, desperation in his eyes. Dad, I'm sorry. I know I screwed up, but if you cut me off now, I'll lose everything. These people, they'll never forgive me for lying. There it was. His concern wasn't for our relationship. It wasn't for the damage he'd done to my reputation or the pain he'd caused me. His concern was for his social standing with people who only liked him because he was buying their affection with money he'd never earned. Marcus, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. You lost everything the moment you decided I was something to be ashamed of. You just don't know it yet. I left him standing in the kitchen among the broken pieces of coffee pot, went to my study, and began making the calls that would change both our lives forever. Because my son wanted to play games with identity and truth. He wanted to erase his father and claim credit for accomplishments that weren't his. Well, two could play that game, and I'd been playing at a professional level for 38 years. Thanks for staying with me so far. I promise you, what comes next will surprise even those who think they know how these stories end. David Chen delivered his preliminary report within 48 hours, and reading it felt like discovering my son was a stranger. The private investigator had done exactly what I'd asked, a complete digital forensic of Marcus's online presence. What he found was a masterpiece of deception that would have impressed me if it hadn't been so devastating. Marcus hadn't just been lying to his friends in person. He'd created an entire fictional identity online. His Instagram account, followed by over 8,000 people, painted the picture of a successful young entrepreneur. Photos of him in expensive suits with captions like, "Another successful quarter for the Mitchell portfolio and growing the family business one acquisition at a time." Every image was staged in my office, my house, my properties. But the narrative was that he was the one running the show. LinkedIn was even worse. Marcus had listed himself as Chief Operating Officer, Mitchell Properties, with a detailed biography describing how he'd taken the reins of the family business to allow his father to enjoy a well-deserved retirement. Endorsements from friends praised his vision and leadership in the real estate sector. The most painful discovery was a series of posts from the past 6 months, where Marcus had been sharing entrepreneurial wisdom with his followers. Quotes about building wealth from nothing, advice about real estate investing, inspirational messages about creating your own success, all of it based on my experiences, my failures and triumphs, repackaged as his own journey. But David's investigation revealed something even more disturbing than social media lies. Banking records showed that Marcus had been receiving wire transfers from 3 different sources, totaling nearly $40,000 over the past year. I called David immediately. "Where is this money coming from?" "That's where it gets interesting, Mr. Mitchell. 2 of the transfers come from trust funds, Jake Morrison and Chelsea Williams. Apparently your son has been borrowing money from his friends." Borrowing, that was a generous term for what appeared to be happening, and the third source, more complicated. It's coming from an account registered to Mitchell Property Management LLC. As far as I can tell, that's a company your son created using your business name as a reference. My son had created a fake company trading on my reputation and was using it to generate income from God knows where. "David, I need you to dig deeper. Find out who's paying into that account and what they think they're buying." While I waited for more information, I decided to conduct my own investigation. That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I followed my son. Marcus left the house around 7, dressed in one of the expensive suits I'd bought him for job interviews he'd never attended. He drove the BMW I'd given him for graduation to the Capitol Grill in Manhattan, where he met 3 people I didn't recognize. I positioned myself at the bar with a clear view of their table and did something that felt both necessary and degrading. I eavesdropped on my own son's business meeting. The 3 people with Marcus were clearly investors of some kind. Middle-aged, well-dressed, taking notes as Marcus presented what appeared to be a business proposal. I couldn't hear the details, but I could see documents changing hands, Marcus pointing to charts and graphs, the kind of confident presentation I'd given thousands of times in my career. When their meeting concluded, I followed Marcus to his next stop, Pravda, an upscale club where he met the usual crowd of friends. But this time I stayed outside and made a phone call to the restaurant. "I'd like to speak to the manager, please. This is regarding a business meeting that just concluded in your establishment." The manager was professional but cautious. "How can I help you, sir? My son just finished a presentation in your restaurant, and I'm concerned about the nature of his business activities. Could you tell me if they requested any special services for a business meeting?" A pause. "Sir, I can't really discuss other patrons' activities, I understand. But if they requested private dining or business presentation services, that would be a matter of public record, wouldn't it?" Another pause. "They did request our private dining room and ask for our presentation equipment, 3-hour rental. The gentleman who booked it said he was presenting a real estate investment opportunity to potential partners. Real estate investment opportunity. Using presentation equipment I'd never seen in a meeting I'd never authorized. My son was selling investment opportunities to strangers. I called David Chen from my car. "David, I need you to expand the investigation. I think Marcus is running some kind of investment scam using my business name. How do you want me to proceed?" "Find out everything. Who he's meeting with, what he's promising them, where the money is going. And David, I think we need to move fast. If he's defrauding people using my company's reputation, this could destroy everything I've built. The next morning brought confirmation of my worst fears. David called at 8 a.m. with an update that made my blood run cold. "Mr. Mitchell, your son has been selling limited partnership interests in something called Mitchell Property Development Fund. He's promising investors 20% annual returns backed by your company's track record. How much money has he raised?" "Near as I can tell, about $400,000 from 6 different investors over the past 8 months. $400,000. Marcus had created a Ponzi scheme using my name and reputation as collateral." "David, what exactly is he telling these people?" "According to the promotional materials he's been sharing, he's presenting himself as your successor, taking over day-to-day operations while you transition to an advisory role. He's using your company's actual financial performance from the past 5 years to project future returns, but the investments aren't going into any legitimate real estate deals. Where is the money going?" "Into the same accounts he's been using. In for personal expenses, restaurants, travel, luxury goods. He's been using new investor money to pay returns to earlier investors while funding his lifestyle with the rest." I sat in stunned silence. My son wasn't just lying about me to his friends or stealing from my credit cards. He was running a sophisticated fraud operation that could send him to federal prison and destroy my company's reputation forever. "David, I need copies of everything, every document, every bank record, every communication, and I need it today." "Mr. Mitchell, what are you planning to do?" "I'm planning to save my son from himself, even if he doesn't want to be saved." That afternoon, I drove to the offices of Morrison, Williams and Associates, where I'd done business for 15 years. Tom Morrison had been my lawyer since the early days of Mitchell Properties, and if anyone could help me navigate this disaster, it was him. "Edward, you look like hell," Tom said, as I entered his corner office overlooking Central Park. "Tom, I need to ask you something in complete confidence. If a family member was committing fraud using your business name, what would be your legal exposure?" Tom's expression grew serious. "How theoretical is this question?" I handed him the folder David had prepared. "Not theoretical at all." For the next hour, Tom reviewed the evidence while I sat in his guest chair, feeling like I was aging in real time. My son had created a complex web of deception that could destroy both of us. "Edward, this is serious. If the SEC gets wind of this, they'll investigate both you and Marcus. Even if you're innocent, the damage to your reputation could be irreversible." "What are my options?" "Legally, you need to report this immediately. File with the authorities. Cooperate fully. Try to minimize the damage. And personally," Tom leaned back in his chair, "that's more complicated. Marcus is your son. Reporting him means he'll likely face federal charges for securities fraud. We're talking about real prison time. And if I don't report him, then you risk being seen as complicit when this inevitably collapses. Ponzi schemes always collapse, Edward. The math doesn't work, and when it does, those investors are going to come looking for someone to blame." I stared out the window at the city where I'd built my fortune, where my son was currently destroying both our reputations, one lie at a time. "Tom, what if there was a third option?" "I'm listening." "What if the investors got their money back before the scheme collapsed? What if Marcus stopped the fraud voluntarily and made full restitution? You're talking about paying $400,000 out of your own pocket to cover your son's crimes. I'm talking about protecting innocent people who trusted the Mitchell name." Tom studied my face carefully. "Edward, even if you could make the investors whole, Marcus would still be guilty of securities fraud. The crime has already been committed, but without victims pressing charges, the government could still prosecute, though I admit it's less likely if everyone gets their money back and no one wants to cooperate with an investigation." I stood, up and walked to the window, looking down at the street where ordinary people went about their lives without knowing that their retirement savings might have been stolen by a privileged kid playing investor with his father's reputation. Tom, I need you to draw up restitution agreements for all 6 investors. Full repayment plus interest. I want this cleaned up before it gets any worse. Edward, you're talking about $500,000 when you factor in interest and penalties. I've spent more than that on Marcus's lifestyle over the years. At least this way, I'll be protecting innocent people instead of enabling his delusions. But as I left Tom's office that evening, I realized that writing a check to clean up Marcus's mess wasn't enough. My son had committed serious crimes, betrayed my trust, and potentially destroyed my reputation. More importantly, he'd shown no remorse, no understanding of the magnitude of his actions. A simple financial bailout would teach him nothing except that Daddy would always clean up his messes, no matter how serious. No, Marcus needed to understand consequences. He needed to experience what it felt like when your carefully constructed lies came crashing down around you. He wanted to play the successful businessman using my money and reputation. He wanted to erase his father and claim credit for accomplishments that weren't his, fine. But every game has rules, and Marcus was about to learn that he wasn't the only player who knew how to strategize. I pulled out my phone and called my assistant. Jennifer, I need you to set up a board meeting for Mitchell Properties. Full board, all department heads. Schedule it for this Friday at 2 p.m. What's the meeting about, Mr. Mitchell? I looked back at the building where Tom Morrison was probably already drafting the legal documents that would save my son from federal prison, whether he deserved saving or not. Succession planning, I said. It's time to discuss the future leadership of Mitchell Properties. Marcus wanted to be the heir apparent. He wanted to run the family business. Perfect. Because I was about to give him exactly what he'd been claiming to have, but on my terms, not his. The game was about to change, and my son had no idea what was coming. Friday afternoon at exactly 2 p.m., I walked into the conference room at Mitchell Properties headquarters for what would be either the most important meeting of my career or the biggest mistake of my life. The mahogany table was surrounded by 12 people who'd helped me build the company from a single truck operation into a multi-state empire. Department heads, senior vice presidents, the board members who'd trusted my judgment for decades. These weren't just employees. They were the foundation of everything I'd created. At the head of the table sat Marcus. I'd called him that morning with an offer I knew he couldn't refuse. Marcus, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding your future role in the company. Why don't you join us for a board meeting this afternoon? It's time we discussed succession planning. The relief in his voice had been palpable. After 3 days of having his credit cards cancelled and his accounts frozen, he probably thought I was ready to forgive and forget, to hand him the keys to the kingdom he'd been claiming to run. He had no idea he was walking into an execution. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, standing at the foot of the table opposite my son, thank you all for accommodating this emergency meeting. As you know, there have been some recent discussions about the future leadership of Mitchell Properties. I gestured toward Marcus, who straightened in his chair with the confidence of someone who believed his lies were about to become reality. My son Marcus has been very interested in taking on more responsibility within the organization. In fact, he's been quite vocal about his readiness to step into a leadership role. Nods around the table. These people had known Marcus since he was a child, had watched him grow up in the shadow of the company. They probably assumed this was a natural transition, a father preparing to pass the torch to his son. Before we discuss any succession plans, however, I think it's important that everyone understands exactly what kind of leader Marcus has shown himself to be. I opened the folder I'd placed on the table and began distributing copies of documents. Bank statements, credit card records, investment prospectuses for the fraudulent Mitchell Property Development Fund. Marcus, would you like to explain to the board what you've been doing for the past 8 months? The color drained from his face as he recognized the papers being passed around the table. Dad, what is this? This is your business plan, son. The one where you've been selling partnership interests in a development fund that doesn't exist, using our company's reputation to defraud investors out of $400,000. The room fell silent, except for the rustle of papers as board members absorbed what they were reading. Sarah Chen, our CFO, looked up with barely controlled anger. Marcus, are you telling me you've been running an unauthorized investment scheme using the Mitchell Properties name? Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It's not what it looks like. I was trying to raise capital for legitimate projects. Which projects? I asked quietly. The ones where you used investor money to pay for vacations to Miami? The restaurant bills for $3,700? The Tiffany purchases that had nothing to do with real estate development? David Harrison, our head of legal, was studying the bank records with the thoroughness of a man who understood criminal liability. Edward, are you telling us that Marcus has been running a Ponzi scheme? I'm telling you that my son created a fraudulent investment vehicle, raised money from investors based on our company's track record, and used those funds for personal expenses while paying earlier investors with money from newer ones. You can draw your own conclusions about what to call that. Marcus finally found his voice. I was going to pay everyone back. It was just temporary. I needed time to put together real deals. With what money? Sarah demanded. According to these records, you've spent everything you raised, plus maxed out credit lines your father didn't know existed. The board members were looking at Marcus like they'd discovered a snake in their midst. These were serious business people who'd built their careers on integrity and hard work. The idea that someone would use their company's reputation for fraud was personally offensive to each of them. Marcus, said Janet Morrison, our head of development, do you understand that what you've done could destroy this company? Our reputation is built on trust. If investors think Mitchell Properties is associated with fraudulent schemes, it wouldn't have come to that, Marcus protested. I had plans, real development projects that would have generated the returns. I promised. I pulled out another document, the preliminary report from the investigation I'd commissioned. Marcus, would you like to explain to everyone where you got the expertise to evaluate real estate investments? What training you have in development finance? What experience you have in project management? Silence, because according to your resume, you've never worked in real estate. You've never held a job for more than 6 months. You've never managed a project budget or evaluated a development opportunity. Yet somehow, you felt qualified to promise sophisticated investors 20% annual returns. Marcus looked around the table desperately, searching for an ally. What he found instead were the faces of people who devoted their careers to legitimate business practices, people who were personally insulted by his amateur attempts at fraud. I was learning as I went, he said weakly. Learning? David's voice could have cut glass. Marcus, you weren't learning. You were gambling with other people's money and our company's reputation. Do you have any idea what the regulatory consequences could be? What this could cost us in legal fees and regulatory scrutiny? I let the board members continue their questioning for another 10 minutes, watching my son's confidence crumble under professional scrutiny. These people understood business in ways Marcus never had. They could see through his explanations and excuses with the clarity that came from decades of real experience. Finally, I called for quiet. Here's what's going to happen, I announced. First, Marcus is going to provide us with a complete list of every investor in his fraudulent scheme. Names, amounts invested, promised returns, everything. Marcus nodded miserably. Second, Mitchell. Properties will make full restitution to every investor, including interest and penalties. We will make it clear that the company had no knowledge of Marcus's activities, but takes full responsibility for the damage done to their trust. Edward, Sarah interjected. You're talking about spending $500,000 to clean up a mess that wasn't our fault. I'm talking about protecting our reputation and making sure innocent people don't suffer because my son decided to play businessman with money he never earned. I turned back to Marcus. Third, Marcus will sign a formal confession detailing his fraudulent activities. This confession will be held in escrow by our legal department. If he ever again uses the Mitchell name for unauthorized business activities, it will be immediately forwarded to federal prosecutors. Dad, you can't. Fourth, I continued, cutting him off, Marcus's employment prospects at Mitchell Properties are permanently terminated. He will never work for this company in any capacity. He will never use our name, our reputation, or our resources for any business purpose. The finality of those words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Marcus's dream of inheriting the family business had just died in front of witnesses. Fifth, all personal accounts and credit facilities that Marcus has access to are immediately closed. He will receive no further financial support from me or from any entity associated with Mitchell Properties. Marcus was crying now, not the tears of remorse, but the tears of someone watching their comfortable life disappear in real time. And finally, I said, looking directly at my son, Marcus will vacate my house within 30 days. He's 27 years old. It's time he learned to support himself without access to money he never earned. The room was dead silent. 12 seasoned business professionals sat watching a father destroy his son's future with the same methodical precision they'd seen him use to build his empire. Janet Morrison finally broke the silence. Edward, I have to ask, what about succession planning? If Marcus isn't going to be involved in the company's future, what are your long-term plans? I'd been waiting for that question. That's a discussion for another day. Right now, my focus is on protecting this company from the damage my son has caused and making sure our clients understand that Mitchell Properties maintains the highest standards of business ethics. After the board members filed out, I was left alone with Marcus in the conference room, where I'd made some of the most important decisions of my professional life. Dad, he said quietly, I know I screwed up. But cutting me off completely, throwing me out of the house, I'm your son. I looked at this young man who shared my genes, but apparently none of my values, who'd been given every advantage and used them to commit fraud. Marcus, being my son, is exactly why this hurts so much, but it's also why it's necessary. I don't understand. For 27 years, I've been teaching you that money solves problems, that there are no consequences for bad decisions as long as Daddy's willing to write a check. I've been enabling your worst instincts while telling myself I was being generous. I gathered the papers from the table, the evidence of his crimes and my failures as a father. You want to be a businessman? You want to make your own way in the world? Perfect. Now you get to learn what that actually means. Marcus reached for my arm as I headed for the door. Please, Dad, I'll do anything. I'll pay everyone back. I'll work for free at the company. Just don't cut me off completely. I stopped and turned back to face him. Marcus, you're going to pay everyone back anyway. I'm making sure of that. But you're going to do it with money you earn yourself, not with another handout from the father you've been calling a janitor behind his back. His face went white as he realized I knew about that particular lie. You thought I didn't know. You thought I didn't hear you tell your friends that I was a retired custodian living in your uncle's house out of charity. Dad, I can explain. No. Explanation necessary. You made your choice about who you wanted me to be in your life. Congratulations. You're about to get exactly what you asked for." I left him sitting in that conference room and walked back to my office, where I had phone calls to make and damage control to coordinate. 38 years of building a reputation could be destroyed in 38 days if I handled this wrong. But as I sat behind my desk, looking out at the city where my son was probably realizing that his comfortable life had just ended, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: relief. For the first time since the divorce, I'd stopped enabling Marcus's destructive behavior. I'd stopped buying his affection with unlimited financial support. I'd stopped pretending that unconditional love meant accepting unacceptable behavior. Now came the hard part. Marcus would have to figure out how to survive without my money, my connections, or my house. He'd have to learn what it meant to work for a living, to face consequences, to build something from nothing. It was a lesson I probably should have taught him 20 years ago. But better late than never. The question was whether my son would rise to the challenge or collapse under the weight of reality. Either way, he was about to discover who he really was when the safety net was gone. If you're still with me, please subscribe to this channel now, because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about father-son relationships and the true meaning of tough love. 2 weeks after the board meeting, I was beginning to understand the difference between winning a battle and winning a war. The immediate crisis had been contained. Tom Morrison's legal team had contacted all 6 investors in Marcus's fraudulent scheme, offering full restitution plus 20% interest for their trouble. To my relief, 5 of them accepted the settlement immediately. They just wanted their money back without the hassle of litigation. The 6th investor was more complicated. Richard Blackwood was a retired pharmaceutical executive who'd invested $50,000 based on Marcus's claims about Mitchell Properties' expansion plans. Unlike the others, Blackwood wasn't satisfied with just getting his money back. He wanted answers. "Mr. Mitchell," he said during our tense phone conversation, "your son presented me with detailed financial projections, architectural renderings, and what appeared to be signed letters of intent from major retailers. This wasn't some casual investment scheme. It was sophisticated fraud." I couldn't argue with him. David Chen's investigation had revealed that Marcus had created an entire fictional development project called Heritage Commons, a mixed-use, retail and residential complex supposedly planned for downtown Albany. The marketing materials were professionally designed, the financial projections looked legitimate, and the architectural renderings were convincing enough to fool experienced investors. The problem was that none of it was real. Marcus had paid a graphics design student $3,000 to create the materials, using my company's actual development history as a template for his fictional project. "Mr. Blackwood," I said carefully, "I understand your frustration. Mitchell Properties will make full restitution, and I'm prepared to offer additional compensation for your time and trouble. This isn't about money anymore, Mr. Mitchell. It's about accountability. Your son committed securities fraud using your company's reputation. He needs to face consequences." That night, I sat in my study trying to calculate the true cost of Marcus's deceptions. The direct financial damage was approaching $600,000 when I factored in restitution, interest, legal fees, and the ongoing investigation. Costs, but the potential damage to Mitchell Properties' reputation was incalculable. Worse, I was beginning to realize that my son's problems ran deeper than simple greed or entitlement. Marcus had created such an elaborate fantasy world that I wondered if he'd started believing his own lies. My reflection was interrupted by a phone call from Jennifer, my assistant. "Mr. Mitchell, I have Margaret Walsh on line 2. She says it's urgent regarding the financial review you requested." Margaret had been my accountant for 12 years, and her definition of urgent usually involved tax implications or regulatory issues that could cost serious money. "Edward," Margaret's voice was tight with concern, "we need to meet immediately. The audit of Marcus's financial activities has revealed some things you need to know about. More fraud? Different kind of problem. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" I met Margaret at her office in Lower Manhattan the next day, bringing coffee and the kind of resignation that comes from expecting bad news. "Edward, sit down," Margaret said, spreading documents across her conference table like evidence at a crime scene. "The good news is that Marcus wasn't running any other investment schemes that we can find. And the bad news. The bad news is that his personal financial situation is much worse than you realized. He owes money to people who aren't as understanding. As legitimate investors." She handed me a folder filled with bank statements, loan documents, and what appeared to be promissory notes. "Marcus has been borrowing money from private lenders to fund his lifestyle. High-interest, short-term loans from people who don't typically involve lawyers when they want to collect." I studied the documents with growing alarm. "How much money?" As I can tell, about $80,000 to 3 different lenders. Interest rates ranging from 20 to 30% annually." "Who are these lenders?" Margaret's expression darkened. "That's where it gets complicated. Based on the payment, instructions and contact information, these appear to be connected to some very unforgiving people. Edward, I think your son borrowed money from loan sharks." The room felt like it was tilting. "When are the payments due?" "That's the problem. Marcus has been making interest-only payments, but the principal amounts are coming due next month. All of them." I did quick math in my head. $80,000 plus accumulated interest. Money that Marcus had no way to pay now that his credit cards were cancelled and his access to my accounts was terminated. "Margaret, what happens if he can't pay? Based on the terms of these agreements? Nothing good. These aren't the kind of people who take you to court for non-payment. They handle collections differently." I left Margaret's office with a sick feeling in my stomach. In trying to teach Marcus a lesson about consequences, I might have put him in real physical danger. That evening, I broke my own rule and called Marcus's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I tried 3 more times over the next hour with the same result. Finally, I drove to the house. My house, where Marcus was supposed to be packing his belongings before the 30-day deadline I'd given him. The BMW was in the driveway, but something felt wrong. The house was dark, except for a single light in Marcus's bedroom window. I used my key to enter through the front door and immediately knew something was seriously wrong. Furniture had been moved, drawers were open, and there were obvious signs that someone had searched the house thoroughly. "Marcus!" I called out, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I found him in his bedroom, sitting on the edge of his bed with a ice pack pressed against the left side of his face. His right eye was swollen shut and his lip was split. "Jesus Christ, Marcus, what happened?" He looked up at me with his one good eye, and for the first time in years, I saw not entitlement or calculation, but genuine fear. "Some guys came by earlier. They wanted to discuss my payment schedule." I sat down beside him, my anger temporarily overwhelmed by parental concern. "How bad is it?" "They weren't here to hurt me, just to make a point. But, Dad," they made it clear, "that next time won't be a friendly conversation. How much do you owe them?" Marcus laughed bitterly, then winced as the movement aggravated his split lip. "About 93,000 now, with interest and penalties. Money I don't have and no way to get." "Why didn't you tell me about these loans when we froze your accounts?" "Because I thought I could handle it. I thought the investor money would cover everything, and I could pay them off before anyone noticed." I looked around his bedroom, at the expensive clothes scattered on the floor, the electronics that cost more than most people's monthly salary, all the material symbols of a lifestyle he'd never earned. "Marcus, I need you to be completely honest. With me, Are there any other debts I don't know about? Any other people who might come looking for money? Just these three. But Dad, they're not going to wait for me to find a job and save up. They want their money now. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the circular driveway where expensive cars had delivered Marcus's friends for parties funded with my money. Now that same driveway had been used by enforcers making sure my son understood the terms of his obligations. Dad, Marcus said quietly, I know you're angry with me. I know I screwed up everything, but I'm scared. These people, they're not like the investors who just want their money back. I turned back to face my son, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the entitled child I'd been enabling, not the fraudster who'd stolen my reputation, but a young man who'd gotten in over his head and was finally understanding that actions have consequences. Marcus, I'll take care of the loans. Really, relief flooded his battered features. But this is the last time, and it comes with conditions. Anything, Dad. Whatever you want. I sat back down and looked directly into his one functional eye. You're going to get a job. A real job, not some token position at a company where I have influence. You're going to work 40 hours a week for market wages. Okay. You're going to live in a studio apartment that you can afford on whatever salary you earn. No help from me with rent or utilities or groceries. I understand. And you're going to pay me back every penny of what I spend cleaning up your messes. The loan shark money, the investor restitution, the legal fees, all of it. It'll probably take you 10 years, but you'll pay back every dollar. Marcus nodded slowly. What kind of job am I supposed to get? I don't have any real experience. I'd been thinking about that question since I'd first discovered the scope of his deceptions. Construction, manual labor. You're going to learn what it feels like to earn money with your hands and your back. Dad, I don't know anything about construction. Then you'll learn. The same way I learned 38 years ago when I started. With nothing but a truck and determination. I stood up again, decision made. I'll pay off your loans tomorrow, but Marcus, this is your last bailout. From now on, you sink or swim on your own. As I headed for the door, Marcus called after me. Dad, why are you helping me after everything I've done? I stopped without turning around. Because you're my son, and despite everything I still love you, but love doesn't mean enabling self-destructive behavior. Sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their choices. Even if they might fail, especially if they might fail. Failure teaches lessons that success never can. I left him in his bedroom, surrounded by the wreckage of his privileged life, and went downstairs to make the phone calls that would save him from loan sharks, but force him to save himself from something worse, a life without purpose, responsibility, or genuine accomplishment. Tomorrow, Marcus would start learning what it meant to be a man instead of a child. Whether he succeeded or failed would be up to him. But for the first time in years, he'd be facing that challenge without a safety net bought with his father's money. The construction site on East 47th Street at 6 a.m. looked like a battlefield. Between sleep and ambition, 24 men in hard hats and work boots moved with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who'd fought this war every day for years. Marcus stood at the chain-link gate looking like he'd dressed for the wrong movie. Designer jeans, $100 sneakers, and a Columbia University sweatshirt that probably cost more than most of these men made in a week. I'd called Ray Castellano the night before. Ray had been my foreman for 15 years, a third-generation construction worker who could build anything and had no patience for anything that couldn't be built with honest work. Ray, I need a favor, a big one. Name it, Mr. Mitchell. I need you to hire my son. A pause that lasted long enough for me to hear Ray reconsidering everything he thought he knew about my judgment. Your son? The one who's never worked construction? That's the one. What's he done? Made some mistakes that are going to cost him about 10 years of honest work to fix. Another pause. You want me to babysit some rich kid who's playing dress-up? I want you to treat him exactly like you'd treat any other new hire. No special consideration because he's my son. No breaks because he's not used to physical labor. If he doesn't pull his weight, fire him. And if he does pull his weight, then maybe he'll learn something about the value of money that's earned instead of inherited. Ray had agreed, but I could hear the skepticism in his voice. He'd seen enough rich kids try to play blue collar for a few weeks before running back to daddy when their hands got dirty. Now, watching Marcus approach the job site foreman with his paperwork, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe throwing him into manual labor was too extreme. Maybe I should have found him an office job where his education would be relevant. But Marcus needed to understand work from the ground up, literally. He needed to experience what it felt like to earn $22 an hour with his body instead of stealing thousands with his lies. I stayed in my car across the street, watching through binoculars like some kind of corporate spy. Ray introduced Marcus to the crew with the kind of rough humor that construction workers use to test newcomers. I could see them sizing him up. Soft hands, pale skin, expensive clothes, and writing him off before he'd picked up his first tool. Marcus was assigned to work with Tony Ricci, a brick mason who'd been laying walls since before Marcus was born. Tony pointed to a stack of bricks and a wheelbarrow, giving instructions that involved more pointing than explaining. For the first hour, I watched my son struggle with the simple task of moving materials from one side of the site to the other. The wheelbarrow was heavier than he'd expected. The bricks were awkward to stack properly. His expensive sneakers had no grip on the uneven ground. By the second hour, sweat had soaked through his sweatshirt despite the October chill. His movements were becoming more deliberate, less wasteful. He was learning that efficiency mattered when every motion cost energy he couldn't afford to waste. During the lunch break, I watched the crew gather around their coolers and thermoses, sharing sandwiches and coffee with the easy camaraderie of men who trusted each other with their lives every day. Marcus sat slightly apart, eating what looked like a protein bar and drinking from a water bottle that probably cost more than their lunch combined. Nobody was actively cruel to him, but nobody was going out of their way to include him either. He was the outsider, the rich kid playing dress-up, and he'd have to earn their respect the same way they'd all earned it. One honest day's work at a time. I drove away before the afternoon shift started, but not before making one more call to Ray. How's he doing? Better than I expected, worse than we need. Kid's got no idea what he's doing, but he's not complaining. Yet, think he'll last the week. Honestly, I give him 3 days, maybe 4 if he's too proud to quit. But Marcus surprised us both. He lasted the week, then another week, then a third week where I stopped checking on him every day and started wondering if I'd underestimated my son's capacity for adaptation. The transformation was gradual, but unmistakable. Marcus's hands developed calluses. His soft physique began showing the lean muscle that comes from 8 hours of physical labor. Most importantly, his attitude started changing from entitlement to something approaching humility. 3 weeks into his construction career, I got a call from Ray that I hadn't expected. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to talk to you about Marcus." "What did he do now?" "That's just it. He's not doing anything wrong. Kid's actually starting to learn the work. Tony says he's got good hands for masonry, pays attention, follows instructions, doesn't try to shortcuts he hasn't earned." "That's good news?" "It's weird news. Most college kids last about 3 days before they realize that real work is harder than their professors told them. Marcus is going on a month and actually asking for overtime. Overtime. My son, who'd never worked a full day in his life, was asking for extra hours. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since this whole ordeal began. I went to visit Marcus at his new apartment. The studio in Queens was everything I'd specified. Small, basic, affordable on a construction worker's salary. No doorman, No granite counters, no amenities beyond functioning plumbing and heat. Marcus answered the door wearing clothes I'd never seen before, work boots, jeans with actual dirt on them, a flannel shirt that looked like it had been purchased for utility rather than style. "Dad, this is unexpected. Can I come in?" The apartment was smaller than his old bedroom, but it was clean and organized. A single chair, a small table, a bed that probably came with the furnished rental. On the table sat a laptop and what appeared to be course materials. "What are you studying?" I asked, pointing to the books. "Construction management, night classes at Queen's Community College." He gestured to the materials with something that looked like pride. "Tony thinks I might have aptitude for project management if I learn the technical side." Construction management. My son was studying to become qualified for the industry where he was learning to work with his hands. "How are you paying for classes?" "Student loans. Turns out when you're broke and have no cosigner, you qualify for aid I never needed before." I sat in his single chair and looked around the Spartan space that had become my son's entire world. "How are you managing financially?" Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, and I noticed that he moved with the careful economy of someone whose body was tired from honest work. "It's tight. After rent, utilities, food, and loan payments, I've got about $50 a week for everything else. But I'm managing." "What about your friends? Jake, Chelsea, the old crowd?" Marcus's expression darkened. "What about them? Do you see them anymore?" "They don't return my calls. Turns out when you can't pick up restaurant tabs and you live in Queens instead of Manhattan, you become a lot less interesting to people who never liked you for your personality anyway." There was bitterness in his voice, but also something that sounded like understanding. "Do you miss it? The lifestyle, the parties, the money?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his work boots. "I miss not being tired all the time. I miss having money for things I wanted, instead of just things I needed. But Dad, I don't miss feeling like a fraud." "What do you mean?" "Every time I told someone I was successful, every time I acted like I'd earned something, there was this voice in the back of my head reminding me that it was all fake, that I was just spending your money and taking credit for your work." He looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something that looked like self-awareness. "Now when I'm tired, it's because I actually worked. When I have money, it's because I earned it. When Tony says I did good work, he means it because he has no reason to lie to me." I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of tension I'd been carrying for months. "Marcus, there's something I need to tell you. Richard Blackwood, one of the investors in your scheme, is still threatening to press criminal charges." Marcus's face went pale. "I thought you settled with everyone." 5 out of 6. Blackwood wants more than just his money back. He wants accountability. He's talking about filing a complaint with the SEC and the district attorney's office. Marcus slumped forward, his head in his hands. "What does that mean?" "It means you could be facing federal charges for securities fraud, prison time, criminal record, the works, even though everyone else got their money back. The crime was committed regardless of restitution. Blackwood has evidence of your fraudulent scheme, and he's angry enough to see it through." I watched my son process this information, seeing the fear in his eyes, but also something else, a kind of resigned acceptance that I'd never seen in him before. "Dad, I deserve whatever happens. I knew what I was doing was wrong, even if I told myself it was temporary." That's not the Marcus I knew 6 months ago talking. 6 months ago, I thought consequences were things that happened to other people. He gestured around his tiny apartment. Turns out I was wrong about that too. I stood up and walked to the small window that looked out over the Queen's Street, where Marcus now lived among working families instead of trust fund babies. "Marcus, I think I can convince Blackwood to accept restitution and drop his threats of prosecution." "How?" "By making him understand that you're not the same person who defrauded him, that you're actually learning from your mistakes instead of just getting bailed out of them." Marcus stood up too, moving with the stiff gait of someone whose muscles were still adapting to physical labor. What would I have to do? Meet with him, face to face. Explain what you've learned, how your life has changed, what you're doing to make sure this never happens again. And if he's not convinced, then you'll face whatever consequences come, and you'll face them as a man who's trying to do the right thing instead of a boy who never understood that actions have consequences. Marcus nodded slowly. Set up the meeting, I'll talk to him. As I prepared to leave, Marcus walked me to the door with an awkwardness that suggested he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. Dad, yes? Thank you. For what? For not just writing another check to make this go away. For making me face what I'd done. For... He struggled with the words. For caring enough about who I could become to stop enabling who I was. I looked at my son standing in the doorway of his tiny apartment, wearing work clothes and speaking with a humility I'd never heard from him before. Marcus, you're welcome. But the real work is just beginning. Earning back trust, building something legitimate, becoming the kind of man people can count on. That's going to take years, not months. I know. But for the first time in my life, I actually want to do the work instead of just wanting the results. I drove back to Manhattan, thinking about the conversation I'd need to have with Richard Blackwood. How do you convince a justifiably angry man that the person who defrauded him has genuinely changed? But more importantly, I found myself thinking about something I hadn't felt in years, pride in my son. Not pride in his accomplishments or his potential, but pride in his willingness to face hard truths about himself and do the difficult work of becoming a better person. The boy who'd asked me to disappear from my own house was gone. In his place was a young man who was learning to build something real with his own hands, his own effort, his own choices. Whether that would be enough to satisfy Richard Blackwood remained to be seen. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed my son might actually deserve a second chance. The question was whether the world would give him one. The meeting with Richard Blackwood took place on a grey Thursday morning in November, at his attorney's office in Midtown Manhattan. The conference room was all polished wood and intimidating law books, designed to make people feel small and vulnerable. Marcus sat across from Blackwood, wearing the only suit he still owned, but something about him was different. The expensive suit hung differently on his frame, which had become leaner and more muscular from 2 months of construction work. His hands, which used to be soft and manicured, now showed the calluses and small scars that came from honest labor. Blackwood was exactly what I'd expected, a silver-haired man in his 60s who'd built his fortune in pharmaceuticals and had no patience for people who thought they could outsmart the system. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Ross, sat beside him with a folder thick enough to put Marcus in federal prison. "Mr. Blackwood," Marcus began, his voice steady but humble, "I want to start by saying that no apology I could offer would be adequate for what I did to you." Blackwood leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with the kind of clinical detachment he'd probably used to evaluate failed drug trials. "Go on. I defrauded you out of $50,000 by creating a completely fictional investment opportunity. I used my father's company's reputation to make my lies seem credible. I spent your money on personal expenses while telling you it was being used for legitimate real estate development." The honesty was stark, uncompromising. No excuses, no justifications, no attempts to minimize the severity of his actions. "And why should I care about your confession, Mr. Mitchell? You've already returned my money with interest." Marcus took a deep breath. "Because I want you to understand that the person who committed that fraud doesn't exist anymore." "Oh, and who are you now?" "I'm someone who gets up at 5 a.m. to work construction for $22 an hour. Someone who lives in a studio apartment in Queens because that's what I can afford on my own salary. Someone who's taking night classes to learn construction management because I want to earn my way into a career instead of inheriting one. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but I caught him glancing at Marcus's hands, noting the evidence of manual labor. "Mr. Blackwood," Marcus continued, "6 months ago, I thought work was something other people did. I thought money was something that just appeared when I needed it. I thought I was entitled to success without effort, respect without earning it. And now? Now I know what it feels like to earn every dollar, to be so tired at the end of the day that you fall asleep before your head hits the pillow. To have co-workers respect you because you pull your weight, not because of who your father is." Catherine Ross looked up from her notes. "That's very touching, Mr. Mitchell, but personal growth doesn't erase criminal behavior." "You're absolutely right," Marcus replied. "Nothing I do now changes what I did to Mr. Blackwood, but maybe it proves that I'm not the same person who would make those choices again." Blackwood leaned forward slightly. "You mentioned co-workers respecting you. What exactly do they respect?" "That I show up every day, that I do what I'm told without complaining, that I ask questions when I don't understand something instead of pretending I know what I'm doing." Marcus paused. "That I don't act like I'm better than them, because I have a college degree. And what have you learned about money? The $22 an hour sounds like nothing until you're the one earning it with your back and your hands. That having $50 left over at the end of the week feels like wealth when you know exactly how much work it took to earn it." I watched Blackwood's face carefully, looking for signs that Marcus's words were having any impact. The older man's expression remained neutral, but he was asking follow-up questions instead of dismissing everything outright. "Mr. Mitchell, let me ask you something. If I don't press charges, if you face no legal consequences for defrauding me, what guarantee do I have that you won't simply return to your old patterns once the novelty of playing blue-collar worker wears off?" It was the crucial question, the one that would determine whether Marcus faced federal prison or got a chance to continue rebuilding his life. "Mr. Blackwood, I can't give you any guarantees, but I can tell you that going back to my old life isn't an option anymore." "Why not?" "Because my old life was built on lies and my father's money. The lies have been exposed and the money is gone. More importantly, I don't want that life anymore." "You don't want unlimited funds and no responsibilities?" Marcus smiled, ruefully. "I want to be able to look at myself in the mirror without feeling like a fraud. I want to earn respect instead of buying it. I want to build something real instead of living off someone else's accomplishments." Blackwood was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus with the same intensity he'd probably used to evaluate potential business partners. "Mr. Mitchell, your father has made full restitution for your crimes. Against my better judgment, I'm inclined to accept that as sufficient resolution to this matter." Relief flooded Marcus's face, but Blackwood held up a hand. "However, I have conditions." "Anything?" "First, you will have no involvement whatsoever in any investment activities for the next 5 years. No soliciting investors, no managing funds, no advisory roles. Nothing. Understood. Second, you will complete your construction management. Program and work in that field for a minimum of 3 years. You will learn legitimate skills and earn legitimate money." "Yes, sir." "Third, if you ever again use your family name or connections to defraud anyone, I will personally ensure that you face the full weight of federal prosecution for both the original crime and any new offenses." "I understand completely." Blackwood stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm giving you this chance not because I think you deserve it, but because I believe people can change if the consequences are severe enough. Don't make me regret this decision, Marcus stood and extended his hand. "Mr. Blackwood, I won't. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to prove that." As we left the attorney's office, I felt like Marcus and I had just walked away from the edge of a cliff. One angry investor's decision to press charges could have destroyed my son's future entirely. "Dad," Marcus said as we stood on the sidewalk outside the building, "I know you probably convinced him to give me this chance." Actually, I didn't say a word during that entire meeting. "Whatever convinced Blackwood came from you." "Really?" "Marcus, 6 months ago you would have made excuses, blamed others, or tried to charm your way out of consequences. Today you took full responsibility and showed genuine remorse. That's what convinced him." We walked toward the subway station, where Marcus would catch the train back to Queens and his evening construction management class. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you cut me off, when you froze the accounts and kicked me out of the house, did you know it would turn out like this?" I thought about the question as we descended into the subway station, surrounded by working people heading home after honest days of labor. "Marcus, I knew that unlimited financial support was destroying you. I knew that facing real consequences might force you to grow up, but honestly, I wasn't sure you'd rise to the challenge. What if I hadn't? What if I just collapsed and blamed you for everything? Then I would have known that I'd failed as a father even more completely than I thought." Marcus swiped his Metro card, purchased with money he'd earned himself, and turned back to me. "Dad, you didn't fail. It just took me 27 years to understand what you were trying to teach me." As his train pulled into the station, Marcus paused at the door. "I'll call you this weekend. Maybe we could have dinner, somewhere I can afford to pay." "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. I watched the train carry my son back to his small apartment in Queens, back to his construction job, and his night classes, and his life built on honest work instead of inherited privilege. For the first time in years, I was proud of the man he was becoming instead of disappointed in the boy he'd been. The lesson was almost complete. But the real test would come in the months and years ahead, when the novelty of manual labor wore off and Marcus had to decide whether this new version of himself was permanent or just another performance. Only time would tell if my son had truly learned the difference between earning respect and buying it. But for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I believed he had. Christmas Eve arrived with the kind of bitter cold that makes New York feel like the loneliest city in the world. I sat in my study, surrounded by the comfortable silence of a house that no longer echoed with lies and manipulation, but felt empty nonetheless. The past month had brought unexpected developments. Marcus had not only completed his first semester of construction management, but earned a 3.8 GPA while working full-time. Ray Castellano had promoted him to assistant foreman trainee, a position that came with actual responsibility and a modest pay increase. More surprisingly, Marcus had started dating Sarah Chen, a nurse at Queen's General who had no idea who his father was or what his background involved. She knew him as Mark Mitchell, the guy who worked construction and went to school at night, who saved money for weeks to take her to dinner at a decent restaurant. "She thinks I'm ambitious," Marcus had told me during one of our weekly dinners. "Because I'm working and going to school at the same time. She has no idea that 6 months ago I was spending more on a single night out than she makes in a week." But tonight, on Christmas Eve, Marcus was working a double shift at the construction site. Emergency repair work on a water main break that couldn't wait for the holiday to end. Time and a half pay that he couldn't afford to turn down. I'd invited him for Christmas dinner, but he'd declined. "Dad, I appreciate it, but I can't afford to take the day off. Sarah's working too. She's covering for a colleague who has kids. We're going to celebrate when we both have time." It was the first Christmas I'd spent alone since the divorce, and the irony wasn't lost on me. A year ago, Marcus would have expected an elaborate celebration funded by my money. Now he was choosing work over family time because he needed every dollar he could earn. I'd succeeded in teaching him the value of money and the dignity of work. But somewhere in that process, I'd lost my son. My phone rang at 11 p.m., jolting me from my brooding. Marcus's name on the caller ID. Dad, I'm sorry to call so late. Marcus, what's wrong? You sound upset. I'm at the hospital. Queen's General. My heart stopped. Are you hurt? No, I'm fine. But Dad, there's something here you need to see. What kind of something? Can you come? Please? It's important. I drove through empty Christmas Eve streets wondering what crisis could have brought my son to a hospital emergency room. Images of construction accidents and medical emergencies flashed through my mind. I found Marcus in the pediatric ward, which was the last place I'd expected to see him. He was wearing his work clothes, covered in the kind of honest dirt that comes from 8 hours of manual labor. Marcus, what's going on? Dad, follow me, but don't say anything until I explain. He led me down a hallway, decorated with children's drawings of Santa Claus and reindeer, past rooms where sick children were spending Christmas Eve hooked to machines instead of opening presents. We stopped outside a room where I could see a little girl, maybe 6 years old, lying in a hospital bed surrounded by enough medical equipment to run a small factory. Her name is Emma Rodriguez, Marcus said quietly. She's been here for 3 months. Leukemia. Her parents both work construction. Her dad is actually on my crew. They've maxed out their insurance, exhausted their savings, taken every loan they can get. I looked through the window at the small girl who was fighting for her life while her parents probably fought to pay for her treatment. Marcus, why are you showing me this? Because of what happened today. Emma's parents got the news that her treatment is working, but she needs another round of experimental therapy that insurance won't cover. $80,000. And her father broke down crying in the equipment trailer. This man who's tougher than anyone I've ever met, who works in all weather without complaining, was sobbing because he can't save his daughter. I began to understand why Marcus had called me here. Dad, I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything. I know I've already cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars cleaning up my mistakes, but I was wondering, you want me to pay for her treatment? I want to pay for her treatment, but I need your help to do it. I stared at my son, confused. Marcus, you make $24 an hour, even if you worked every day for the next year. I know the math, Dad, but I have something worth more than my salary. What? Marcus pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. Remember the trust fund you set up for me when I turned 18? The one you froze when you cut me off? I remembered. $2 million that was supposed to ensure Marcus never had to worry about money. Money I'd locked away when I discovered his fraud. You still control that fund, right? As the trustee. Yes, but Marcus, that money is for your future. Your retirement, your children's education. Dad, that money was never mine. I never earned it, never deserved it. It's just another form of inheritance I haven't worked for. He handed me the paper. It was a formal request to liquidate the trust fund. I want you to use $80,000 to pay for Emma's treatment. The rest can go back into your business or charity or whatever you think is right, but I don't want money I didn't earn. I stood in that hospital hallway, holding a document that would essentially give away my son's financial security, and tried to understand what I was seeing. Marcus, you're talking about walking away from $2 million. I'm talking about using money that was never really mine to save the life of a 6-year-old girl whose father works harder than I ever imagined possible. What about your future? What about Sarah? What if you want to get married, buy a house, have children? Marcus smiled, and for the first time in his life, it looked completely genuine. Then I'll earn the money to do those things. The same way Emma's parents have been trying to earn the money to save their daughter. The same way Sarah earns her money taking care of sick people. The same way you earned the money that created that trust fund in the first place. I looked through the window at Emma Rodriguez, sleeping peacefully despite the tubes and wires that connected her small body to the machines keeping her alive. Marcus, are you absolutely certain about this? Dad, 6 months ago, I stole $400,000 from investors to fund a lifestyle I'd never earned. Tonight, I'm asking you to help me give away $2 million to save a life. Which person would you rather have as a son? The answer was obvious, but the implications were staggering. My son was volunteering to give up generational wealth to help a family he barely knew. There's something else, Marcus continued. Emma's father doesn't know I'm Edward Mitchell's son. To him, I'm just another guy on the crew. If we do this, it has to be anonymous. No credit, no recognition, no tax benefits. Why anonymous? Because this isn't about me being generous with money I didn't earn. This is about doing the right thing, without expecting anything in return. I folded the trust fund document and put it in my pocket. Marcus, I'll make the arrangements. Emma Rodriguez will get her treatment. Thank you, Dad, but I want you to understand something. Once this money is gone, it's gone. No trust fund, no inheritance, no financial safety net. You'll be completely dependent on what you can earn yourself. I understand, and honestly, that's exactly what I want. We stood in that hospital hallway, surrounded by the sounds of machines and healing, and I realized that my son had just given me the greatest Christmas gift I'd ever received. Not because he was giving away money. Anyone can be generous with inherited wealth. But because he'd chosen to be the kind of person who would sacrifice his own security to help a child he barely knew. The boy who'd asked me to disappear from my own house was truly gone. In his place was a man who understood that some things were more important than money, more valuable than comfort, more meaningful than safety nets bought with someone else's sacrifice. Marcus, I said as we walked back toward the elevator, I'm proud of you. For giving away money I never earned. For becoming the kind of man who would give away money he never earned to save a life that had nothing to do with him. As we left the hospital together, I thought about the strange journey that had brought us to this moment. A year ago, Marcus had been stealing from me to fund his lies. Tonight, he was asking me to help him give away his inheritance to save a stranger's child. Sometimes the coldest lesson leads to the warmest heart, and sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters. Emma Rodriguez would get her treatment. Marcus would build his life with his own hands and his own choices. And I would finally have the son I'd always hoped for, even if it took losing him first to find him. The lesson was complete. But the real story was just beginning. 5 years later, I stood in the same construction site where Marcus had first learned to push a wheelbarrow. But everything was different now. The project was one of Mitchell Properties' most ambitious developments, a mixed-use complex that would bring affordable housing and commercial space to a neighborhood that desperately needed both. But I wasn't there as the company owner, checking on progress. I was there as a guest. Ladies and gentlemen, Ray Castellano announced to the crowd of workers, city officials, and community leaders, I'd like to introduce the project manager who made this development possible, Marcus Mitchell, president of Apex Construction Management. My son stepped forward to cut the ribbon on a building he'd designed, funded, and managed entirely through his own company. The same hands that had struggled with a wheelbarrow 5 years ago now held architectural plans for a $40 million development. But the numbers weren't what made me proud. It was the way his workers looked at him, with genuine respect earned through years of shared labor. It was the way community leaders trusted him because he'd proven himself reliable. It was the way Sarah, now his wife of 2 years, smiled at him with the kind of love that's built on knowing someone's true character. After the ceremony, Marcus found me in the crowd. Dad, thanks for coming. Wouldn't miss it. Though I have to ask, how did you manage to land this project? Mitchell Properties bid on this contract too. Marcus grinned. Better proposal, lower costs, and a project manager who actually understands construction from the ground up instead of just the financial side. Are you saying my company's getting soft? I'm saying your company's getting beat by someone who learned that there's no substitute for doing the work yourself. We walked through the construction site together, past workers who nodded respectfully to Marcus, not because of who his father was, but because of who he'd become. Marcus, can I ask you something? Do you ever regret giving up the trust fund? The easy life you could have had? He paused next to a foundation wall where workers were laying rebar with precise efficiency. Dad, 5 years ago I was spending your money to buy friends who didn't really like me, living in a house I didn't earn, claiming credit for accomplishments that weren't mine. I was miserable and didn't even know it. And now? Now I wake up every morning knowing that everything I have, my business, my marriage, my reputation, my self-respect, I built with my own choices and my own work. He gestured toward the building rising around us. This project will house 60 families and create 200 jobs. When it's finished, I'll know that I didn't inherit it or steal it or buy it with someone else's money. I earned it. As we reached my car, Marcus pulled an envelope from his jacket. Dad, there's something I want to give you. Inside was a cashier's check for $437,000. What's this? It's the money I stole from you. Every dollar you spent cleaning up my messes, calculated with 5 years of interest. I finally finished paying it back. I stared at the check, remembering the 17-year-old boy who'd once spent $3,000 on a single dinner to impress his friends. Marcus, this represents years of work. It represents something more important than work. It represents making things right. I don't need this money. I know, but I needed to pay it. There's a difference. I folded the check and put it in my pocket, but not because I needed the money, because accepting it meant acknowledging that Marcus had truly completed his transformation from entitled child to responsible man. Dad, can I ask you something now? Of course. That night you asked me to disappear from the house. Did you plan all of this? The job with Ray, the frozen accounts, the whole thing. I thought about the question, remembering the pain and anger I'd felt discovering Marcus's lies and fraud. Marcus, I planned to teach you a lesson about consequences. I had no idea whether you'd learn from it or be destroyed by it. What if I'd been destroyed by it? Then I would have failed as a father even more completely than I thought I already had. Marcus smiled and extended his hand for a handshake that turned into a hug. Dad, you didn't fail. It just took me 27 years to understand that love sometimes means letting people fall so they can learn to stand on their own. As I drove home through the city where both Marcus and I had built our lives, I thought about the strange journey that had brought us to this moment. My son had asked me to disappear from his world, and in a way, I had. The father who'd enabled his destructive behavior, who'd bought his affection with unlimited financial support, who'd confused love with indulgence, that father had disappeared completely. In his place was a man who'd learned that the greatest gift you can give someone you love isn't money or comfort or an easy life. It's the opportunity to discover their own strength, their own worth, their own capacity for growth. Marcus had lost his inheritance, but gained his self-respect. He'd given up easy money, but earned the right to be proud of his accomplishments. He'd sacrificed comfort, but found purpose. Most importantly, he'd learned the difference between being loved for who you might become and being valued for who you actually are. The boy who'd been ashamed of his father had become a man I was proud to call my son. Emma Rodriguez, now 11 years old and cancer-free, was thriving in school and planning to become a doctor. Her parents still didn't know who'd paid for her treatment, but Marcus got updates on her progress from her father, who'd become one of his most trusted foremen. Sarah was pregnant with their first child, a daughter they planned to name Ellen after the grandmother she'd never meet. Marcus had already started a college fund for her, money he was earning and saving himself. And me? I was learning to be a grandfather who would love his granddaughter unconditionally while teaching her that love and limits weren't opposites. They were two parts of the same gift. The lesson that began with humiliation had ended with redemption. The son who'd asked his father to disappear had discovered that the most important person in the room is the one who's earned the right to be there. Sometimes the coldest lesson teaches the warmest truth, that dignity isn't inherited, respect isn't bought, and love isn't about giving people what they want. It's about helping them become who they're meant to be. And you? Would you have done the same thing I did? Would you have had the courage to let your child fall so they could learn to stand? I want to know your opinion in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to this channel to see more incredible stories like this one, capable of showing us the power of tough love and second chances. And click on the recommended video on your screen to hear another moving story about justice, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds between parents and children. Thank you for listening to my story. Sometimes the greatest victory comes not from winning, but from helping the people we love discover their own strength to win.